Yeah.
Grayed out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order. It's 7:09 p.m. Let's do our Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, can we please have a roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Ivanov?
Here.
Commissioner Foster?
Here.
Vice Chair Gonska?
Here.
Chair Leslie?
Here. Okay. I'd like to go to, we had to reconvene from our closed session. And do we have anything to report out?
Thank you, Chair. The board convened into closed session at 6:15 p.m. We've now adjourned closed session at 6:45 with no reportable action taken. Thank you.
Thank you. I can give our fellow commissioners a few minutes to look over our April minutes for approval.
I reviewed them and move that we accept the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. May we please have a roll call vote?
Yes. Commissioner Ivanov?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Vice Chair Gonska?
Yes.
Chair Leslie?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So I'd like to go to our Jonathan Hollip, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners, and members of the public who've joined us tonight. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the resignation of and express my thanks to Board Commissioner Lonnie Gwynn. Commissioner Gwynn took on a role with the board after many years with the Rent Control Agency, including as board secretary. The fact that he took on this role with the board after his retirement is a testament to his dedication to the mission of this organization and his commitment to public service. So thank you, Commissioner Gwynn, and I know I speak for the entire staff when I say that we wish you the very, very best. As you're aware, the board will take up an item related to the vacancy created by the resignation later this evening. I also wanted to thank staff, in particular Amelia Platas and Micah Michalski, who, along with Public Information Manager Dan Costello, facilitated both a landlord and tenant seminar since your last meeting, We had a particularly good attendance at the tenant seminar, which Amelia and Micah led. To ascertain feedback, an evaluation form was distributed, and I want to share some of the feedback that Amelia and Micah received. So these are quotes from people who attended. Excellent, thank you. I hope more tenants come to the seminar. Both presenters were very knowledgeable and very patient with answering questions. Excellent workshop and informative. Continue the same. I really liked when code and attorneys were present. Thank you, Amelia and Micah. Thank you, so helpful. And finally, your customer service is exceptional. Thank you. I sleep better knowing you are protecting us. I wanted to share that with the board and the public as it exemplifies the outstanding constituent service provided by the entire rent control team. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
That's really nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I? That was such a great touch. Adding in the comments, I don't recall ever hearing feedback on the comments read into the record. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next agenda item, item 10A. May we please have a staff report?
Good evening, Commissioners. The first owner occupancy exemption tonight is by Shane Amanda Kammer for the property at 1443 Franklin Street. This is a 2-unit property. They're the sole owners of this property. The question that's before you is whether they have lived, they provided sufficient evidence to show that they lived on the property as their principal residence for at least 4 months or since October 24th of 2023. And the record shows that they have. They don't own any other residential property. They submitted utility, financial, and government records that show that they present themselves as living on the property to those institutions. And they because none of the other unit on the property is not rented, we sent the hearing investigator to the property, and she did an inspection, and her observations are consistent with their claimed occupancy. For those reasons, we recommend that you grant the exemption.
Thank you. Is there any? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Ivanov.
This is a rather standard exemption, so I would move that we adopt the findings of facts and conclusions of law.
Second.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Commissioner Ivanov?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Vice Chair Gonska?
Yes.
Chair Leslie?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to our next item, 10A2. May we please have a staff report?
Certainly. This is for the property at 921 11th Street. The applicant is Kayvon Farouzian. Excuse me. This is a 3-unit property, and Mr. Farouzian is the sole owner through his living trust. He provided utility and financial and government records to show that he lived on the property. He does own other residential properties in the city of Los Angeles. He provided leases to show that those are rented and he doesn't live in them. And we also sent tenant response forms to the 2 other units on the property, which are rented. Both tenants confirmed that Mr. Farouzian has lived on the property for at least the last 4 months prior to the application. And for that reason, staff recommends that the board grant the exemption application.
Commissioner Foster.
Thank you. I have a couple questions about this one. I am not questioning that it appears the person has moved on to the property. It seems clear that they have and are aware of exactly all the things that we use to prove that fact. I'm just curious, is it true that this, I see in the staff report, this landlord also owns another 3-unit or less property in Santa Monica?
That is correct.
And also moved on to and then off of that one in less than 2 years at another date, is that correct?
Yes, that one we granted the board granted in 2014, and we actually lapsed that exemption this last year. he notified us that he was moving off of the property. And I presume that was because he was moving on to this one, because he then applied for an owner occupancy exemption on this one.
Do we know if in either time that a property he owned in Santa Monica of 3 units or less, when he moved on to both of those properties, was there someone living in the unit into which he moved?
I looked into the record, and there wasn't any owner occupancy eviction filed with us, which would then have us, if he had done that, then he would be restricted, and we would restrict our rent for the next tenant, because you can't evict someone as an owner and for owner occupancy, then move off and then turn around and rent that unit at market. You must then rent that unit at the old rent plus the annual general adjustments. Okay. And no such thing happened in either of those cases.
And is it part of your standard practice when contacting tenants of this property of what happens when an owner decontrols it, of their rights under AB 1482 state law?
Yes, both since 2020, when that particular legislation and also the city's legislation, which provides for permanent relocation at the tenant's option, when if a landlord raises the rent above what it would have been under rent control, we inform both of with regards to both of those to the tenants in my review.
I think my last question and my biggest concern is that the same owner has moved onto and off of the same property more than once now. The same property in 2002 for less than 2 years, and now again, so decontrolling it twice. And I just wonder if you've ever seen precedent for that happening before.
I've been doing these owner occupancy exemptions since, I believe, 2015. This is not something that I've ran into. It is surprising in that way.
All right, thank you. I am satisfied that they have met the requirements under our law as it is today, and would move that we accept the findings of fact and conclusions of law and grant the exemption.
Second.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Or Commissioner Ivanov?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Vice Chair Gonska?
Yes.
Chair Leslie?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Now, moving on to our administrative items. Item 12A.
Thank you, Chair. So 12A is the announcement of the 2024 annual general adjustment and consideration of opposing a dollar amount ceiling to the 2024 general adjustment. Under the Rent Control Charter Amendment, the general adjustment for a given year is equal to 75% of the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers in the Los Angeles, Riverside, Orange County region, as reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the 12-month period ending as of March of the current year, and then rounded to the nearest 10th decimal place. So the increase for the 12-month period ending March 2024 is used, then 75% of that percentage increase is the general adjustment. The charter also states that in no event shall the general adjustment be less than 0% or greater than 3%. The percentage increase in the CPI for the 12 months ending March 2024 was 4.0%. 75% of 4% is 3%. So 3%, which also happens to be the maximum, is the allowed general adjustment for 2024. This is the adjustment that landlords may implement effective September 1st, 2024, subject to any dollar amount ceiling that the board may separately impose pursuant to City Charter Section 1805B. Regarding the consideration of imposing a dollar amount ceiling to the 2024 general adjustment, City Charter Section 1803G states, the board shall hold at least one public hearing to consider the views of interested parties before deciding whether to impose a dollar amount ceiling on the general adjustment under Section 1805B. Therefore, a public hearing for consideration of that issue will be held at the board's June 13th meeting. City Charter Section 1805B 1 through 3 explains how a dollar ceiling amount is ascertained. In Step 1, the 85th percentile of the maximum allowable rent of all controlled units is determined. For 2024, that figure is $3,522. In Step 2, the 85th percentile of the maximum allowable rent for all controlled units with a base rent established before January 1st, 1999 is determined. The 2024 figure for those units is $1,537. Next, the average of the two rents arrived at in Steps 1 and 2 You take that and multiply that amount by the annual general adjustment. So the two figures I just mentioned divided by 2 comes to $2,529.50. We take that average and multiply that times the new AGA, which is 3.0, and you get $75.89. And you round it to 76. So that's the number, 76.
There'll be a quiz.
So if the board were to set a dollar amount ceiling, a maximum increase of $76 would apply to all units with MARs of $2,517 and above. Staff recommends that the board chair announce that the 2024 annual general adjustment percentage will be 3.0%, subject to any dollar amount ceiling that the board may, in its discretion, separately impose. Staff makes no recommendation on whether a dollar amount ceiling should be imposed. A public hearing will be set for the evening of June 13th, 2024, so the board may hear from interested parties on this subject. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions from our fellow commissioners? No? Okay. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our next administrative item. That would be item 12B.
You want her to declare it? Chair should announce. Chair, you just need to announce the annual general adjustment of 3%.
My apologies. So here is the announcement of our annual adjustment of 3% for the year of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, 12B.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Chair. We're on to 12B. Let me just set up my PowerPoint real quick here. I'm up and running. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Wow, it's already working. Sorry, I'm seeing something different on my screen. It was a different screen last time. You helped me with it. Should I close it out and try again? Everybody gets to see my desktop. It's not that interesting, I promise. So,
And then slideshow.
okay. There we go. Okay, thank you. All right, sorry about that. So 12B is comments on the third quarter budget for the fiscal year 24. Before we get to the next item, which is the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget, I'll go through the board's experience as of the third quarter of the current fiscal year. Okay. So the board received a mid-year report for the fiscal year just last month. So I'm just going to provide a very brief update tonight. The written report provides additional details. Current projections show that by year end, revenue is expected to be $24,474 less than the $6,129,732 originally anticipated. It now appears that expenditures will be approximately $39,374 less than the adopted expenditures of $6,138,053. Savings of about $46,000 in the salaries and wages category and $14,000 in the supplies and expenses category will help offset over expenditures related to the computer systems upgrades in the capital outlay category, and we're looking at an over expenditure of about $20,000 there. So this is the bottom line. Based on current projections, we anticipate a modest savings of $6,579 as opposed to the original projection of a $8,321 deficit. Any savings realized at the end of this fiscal year will go into the board's reserve account. The seventh payment to the city for the 2017 loan on the PERS prepayment will be transferred to the city at the end of this fiscal year. Again, the written third quarter budget report provides additional details about noteworthy items, and the projections help inform us about the proposed operating budget for fiscal year 24-25, which we'll be talking about next. And that's all I'll report on, but I'm happy to take any of your questions regarding that third quarter report.
Anyone have any questions? Any commissioners? Yeah.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to point out that the projected surplus is even slightly higher than it was, I think, in the second quarter update that you gave us a few months ago. Which is obviously even then was higher than the projected deficit that from the original budget about 6 months ago. So I just want to thank you for the report and commend you and the staff for keeping such a good eye on the budget.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you. Excellent job. Okay, wait, let me go back. On to our next administrative item, that would be item 12C.
Okay, so, am I on? Okay, thank you. So this item is the 2024-2025 budget presentation, and it provides an opportunity for the board to review and comment upon the proposed fiscal year 24-25 budget before you set it for public hearing and adoption on June 13th. The rent control law provides that before July 1st of each year, the board must hold a public hearing and adopt a budget for the upcoming fiscal year. To finance the agency's reasonable and necessary expenses, the board charges landlords an annual per-unit registration fee. Owners who pay the fee by August 1st and are in compliance with the law may pass through half of the fee to tenants as a monthly surcharge on their rent. The proposed budget represents staff's best estimate of the board's revenue and expenses for the coming year. Because the budget predicts future events, it's an educated forecast, but as always, we strive to be as accurate as possible while conservatively projecting likely income and expenses. As I move through the proposed budget presentation, please let me know if you have any questions. It's possible that I'll need to enlist Lima Noseworthy to answer, since she's our budget coordinator, and what staff is presenting here tonight is the culmination of her incredibly diligent efforts. The proposed operating budget for next year projects operating expenditures of $6,269,642 and revenue of $6,192,660 based upon a $228 per unit annual registration fee. The board raised the fee in 2022, and that level of funding will cover the board's reasonable and necessary expenses for fiscal year 24-25, with a projected deficit of $76,982, which will be covered by the board's reserve fund. This proposed budget includes one-time expenses of approximately $100,000. More than half of that total is for partial reimbursement to long-term employees, those who were hired before July 1st, 2012, of contributions they made toward a retirement benefit known as the employer-paid member contribution that was eliminated in 2020. A smaller reimbursement will occur next fiscal year, and costs associated with the anticipated retirement of a long-term employee comprise the remainder. In addition to the operating budget, one non-operating expense of $53,620 is included. This is the eighth payment on the loan that the board received from the city in 2017 to accelerate the paying down of the agency's unfunded pension liability. Okay, so up on the screen now and on the first page behind your tab Agency Organization and Goals tab in the budget book is a chart that shows the organizational structure of the agency. In a service organization like ours, the key resource is the people who work for the agency and advise the board. In fiscal year 24-25, the agency will have 24 positions, the same number as this year. The billing coordinator position is removed, and those duties will be absorbed by two newly hired information coordinators, one position of which was added by the board earlier this year. With an internal promotion, we are adding another information analyst position, but there's no net addition to the number of staff. The labor summary just behind the org chart sets these changes out in detail. In addition to our permanent staff members, as needed or temporary employees will continue to assist us. A temporary employee will assist the hearings department by handling many of the mediations related to decreased petitions and excess rent complaints, and a retired information analyst will assist in the busy summer months as needed. To ensure that adequate as-needed assistance will be available, we've allocated $78,128 in the upcoming budget to this line item. The next few slides show the agency's goals for the coming fiscal year and are also behind the labor summary in your budget book. I'll mention a few. We're constantly trying to increase efficiencies through the use of technology. Since the launch of the N4 rent tracking system in 2022, we've continued to make progress on our ongoing goal of increasing efficiencies through the use of technology. As soon as this upcoming billing period, we anticipate a new online payment system through integration of the Invoice Cloud platform with the existing Civics system. Both registered Civics users and non-registered payees will be able to use the system to make fast, efficient online payments. We'll continue to encourage users to register an account with Civics, and we've seen growth and expect continued growth in that area. As we onboard new employees, we'll use that opportunity to develop standardized operation and training manuals to ensure understanding of the system throughout the agency and consistency of service. Of course, we're always trying to make sure that everyone is understanding of the need to comply with the rent control law. And so to achieve that goal, we plan for possible changes in state law that impact Santa Monica's rent control law, for example, amendments to Costa-Hawkins, or changes to eviction procedures. We're going to implement new procedures to improve monitoring of properties withdrawn under the Ellis Act and ensure compliance with good faith requirements. And we will proactively pursue payment of unpaid registration fees and require recertification of owner-occupied fee waivers. During the coming fiscal year, we'll continue our collaboration with other city departments. We'll collaborate with other jurisdictions as well to determine the best practices for ensuring compliance with state and local rent stabilization laws. We'll continue to support values of equity, inclusion, and accountability, and evaluate practices and procedures to improve access and efficiency. We'll ensure equitable access and service to all members of the community by continuing to gather demographic information about the constituents who contact the agency. We'll adapt our outreach methods and internal processes to reduce barriers that may prevent some community members from using our administrative remedies. And we'll also continue to look into ways to modernize board regulations to enable streamlining of agency procedures and practices. In addition, we'll continue to adapt agency processes to balance in-person and remote services while ensuring performance of essential functions and productivity. We're also going to have to prepare for staff changes. We'll plan for and implement effective succession plans to address changes related to retirements of long-term employees. We'll identify and implement appropriate workflow delegation and classification changes as needed. Personnel changes also mean that continued cross-training of existing staff, development of new skills, and training of new staff will continue to be a priority during the coming year. We'll also offer training and mentorship to existing staff to ensure retention of institutional knowledge and growth opportunities within the agency. So the next slide and the document under the proposed 2024-2025 agency tab in your budget book is the actual agency budget. The budget text on pages 2 through 15 of your budget book provides detail of each line item, and I'll discuss a few specific items. So the FY 24-25 budget maintains all the current operations of the agency, including daily operations, outreach, and board meetings. And the proposed expenditure budget is in the right-hand blue column, and that is $6,269,642. As I stated at the outset, the most important resource of the Rent Control Board is the people who provide services to the community and advise the board, and therefore the salary and wages allocation represents a significant percentage of the annual expenditure. The first line, which is 511000, is the amount allocated for permanent employee salaries. I previously discussed the as-needed line. Workers' compensation costs, which is 512100, have dropped year over year as older claims were resolved and no new significant claims have been filed. So our projection for the coming fiscal year is relatively modest. Not surprisingly, health insurance costs continue to rise with a projected increase of 7% as of January 2025. Some of the insurance costs are offset by employee contributions toward the cost of the premium for their selected healthcare plan. There are a couple items related to retirement costs. The retirement contributions in line 513000 are set at a contribution rate of 27.969% of staff salaries. That's up from 26.712% of staff salaries in the current fiscal year. And just as a reminder, the agency does not pay into Social Security. The City Council has suspended advance payment toward the city's unfunded liability to CalPERS at least until fiscal year 27-28, so they can restore some services eliminated during the city's 2020 restructuring. Therefore, there's no allocation for this item. And the board will be making the 8th payment on the roughly $519,000 loan received from the city in 2017. This is a non-operating expense that is paid from the agency's reserves, and that's $53,620. In supplies and expenses category, I'll note a few items. Line 523420 shows the agency's indirect costs. These are the charges assessed the agency by the city for various services such as maintenance of office space, payroll, procurement, printing, the 311 line, information technology. These services and costs are detailed on pages 5 through 9 of your budget book. The total of $431,073 set forth represents a 3.1% increase over the FY 23-24 allocation. The other cost allocation is totaled $52,554 at line 525260, which this year includes $35,000 for election costs to fill 2 rent control board seats in the 2024 election. Did you have a question?
Yeah, can I interrupt you for a question before we get past it?
Sure.
So, and I'm not sure why I didn't catch this last year, but the city is charging us the indirect cost line. Can we go back to that line 420?
Sure.
Sorry, which page are you on?
So in the middle section, it's the one he just talked about, 523420.
It's on page 1 of the budget.
Page 1, the same page we're on. It's the one he just said where the city charges us for this, that, and the other. Our rent control with the city of Santa Monica doesn't seem to be very controlled. I look back, so it's 431 this year. 418 last year. It's a $100,000 jump over the year before that. And before that, it was always hovering around 300 for 4 straight years. I know that you are relatively new here, but can staff or Lima or Dan or anybody shed some light on what that large jump was all about? That's a pretty large jump.
Hi.
Hi.
So part of the jump was they used to do an indirect report every 2 years. And so when they would do a report, it was always looking back 1 or 2 years prior to come up with what the costs were, and then that would get allocated into the next 2-year budgets. The city does a 2-year budget, so that's why it's always typically a 2 years. There was an issue at some point where they weren't doing the reports when they should have been doing them. So there were many years where all they had us do was add 5% to the prior number, 3% to the prior number, 5% to the prior number. So some of that change where you see is very little. There wasn't a new report. There wasn't a new basis for allocations. It was just an incremental increase over the prior year's assessment. One was due to be issued COVID year. It did not get issued that year. It did not get issued until 21-22 is when that report was done. So by the time that report was issued, now it was looking into a more current period than the prior reports, which were always just building percentages over the prior years.
But actual costs, I understand estimating and applying 5% or 3%, sounds much like our rent increases, which sounds much like inflation. So I'm just still not, it's not that you didn't explain it, what they did.
Right.
I guess I still don't understand why.
So-
Why it would add up to a jump that's 10, 15, 20, 30%, 50%, you know, why the large jump?
They restructured a number of the departments throughout the city. Number one, they moved where funds were coming from and what services were being charged for. If you were to look back on the detail of every single report, some years we got charged for this item. The next year we didn't get charged for that, but we got charged for something else. This big jump was mostly attributable to the computer services, the ISD department. They made some major infrastructure changes to the systems within the city, the networking systems, security systems, all of that. A huge jump. So our allocation proportionally based on the number of computers, the number of network lines we have, the number of phones we have, jumped up significantly. Most of the big increase that you see is related to ISD costs.
Interesting.
Yeah. I fought tooth and nail over many of them and got a few wins, but didn't win enough.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So our landlord raised the rent, found us some new things to charge us for.
On the plus side, there were some divisions that charged us a lot less than they've been charging us other years. So
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe
jump.
maybe that just warrants a new look at that arrangement in the future. But thank you for answering the question.
Okay. So I left off at legal expenses, that's line 536510. The proposed budget allocation is $20,000 to cover the direct costs of litigation, including discovery, investigation, court filings, trial prep, and outside counsel if it's ever needed. If the board's legal fees are higher than $20,000, the board has a designated reserve of approximately $42,000 for legal expenses. If there is a need, these funds can be moved into the next fiscal year's allocations with board approval.
So I had a question about the legal expenses section, because I'm noticing this is actually higher than in previous years, generally speaking. But knowing how quickly litigation costs can rack up, 20,000 seems like a very tiny number to me. So can we just get a little more detail on how we got to that figure and if we're confident that that's sufficient for us?
So this figure is fairly a typical estimate, and so you'll see that the actual expenses, I think, for 22-23 came in at around 16,000. So that's a rough estimate. Litigation includes the writs that we do that Rebecca does as well. So when we say litigation, we're not necessarily talking about full-blown initiating civil litigation or defending. It's usually just the writ practice. If there is something else that warrants a bigger leap, we'll come back to you all.
Like outside counsel or something.
Well, even just inside, yeah.
So line 552010 shows a professional services allocation of approximately $125,000. This will cover continuing support for the Enforce system, legislative lobbyists, and other consulting services. Capital outlays total $89,200, which is dedicated primarily to equipment and technology systems upgrades. Unless there are any questions, I can move into the revenue section.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
And commissioners, can we hold our questions till it gets through a lot more of this and just bring him back? Just could you jot down your questions or what portion you want to question him on so we can get through a little bit further? Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so slide 10 is our revenues. And that's on page 16 of your budget book, and it starts on page 16, and page 18 summarizes the board's sources of revenues. Total revenue projected for fiscal year 24-25 is approximately $6,192,660 based upon a $228 per unit registration fee. That comes, of course, to $19 a month with a $9.50 pass-through to tenants for those landlords who pay on time. And that would be billing at a number of 26,630 units. We also anticipate collecting approximately $50,000 of past due fees from previous years for a total of $6,121,640 in registration fees. During the year, as certain units become eligible for fee waivers or granted exemptions, refunds are issued to owners. So we're anticipating refunds of $11,500. And so taking that, the refund figure out, the registration fee revenue will be $6,110,140. That's our estimate. The other major source of revenue in previous years has been the interest earnings on city-invested rent control funds. The city treasurer is estimating a rate of return on invested funds of 1.7%, resulting in anticipated interest earnings of just about $76,500. The other sources of revenue are projected to include $6,000 for administrative record charges, filing fees, and other miscellaneous charges. With total projected revenue of $6,192,660 and projected expenses of $6,269,642, the proposed budget projects a deficit of $76,982, which will be covered by the board's reserve fund. The reserve fund at the beginning of the coming fiscal year will be $1,548,696. So again, I just want to thank Lima so much for her incredible and very detailed work in preparing this budget. And we're both here now to answer any questions you might have.
Commissioner Foster.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work, staff, as always. And this is just going to be, I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but the interest earnings, so myself, my family, my PTA unit, the board I sit on of a charity, we've all decided over the past couple of years to move money into high yield, high interest savings accounts. And our PTA unit, we put our money into a 6-month CD, and we ended up with this massive amount of interest earned that was 5%. And it was like $10,000. Yeah, it was a significant sum. So I just wonder, how are we only getting 1.7? I'm serious. You said the city's investing that?
So we don't take our money that is sitting in the reserves and take it to a bank and do whatever we want with it. Our money
Understood.
Our money is in with the rest of the city's money. They do put things in long-term, short-term. They have a whole mixed portfolio of where money is and where money isn't. Our share of what the interest earns based on what we have is estimated at the 1.7. We used to have years where it was super high and we got hundreds of thousands of dollars just in interest. So it's been creeping up. If you may recall, there were some years, a few years ago, it was down to 23,000, I think. So 1.7, frankly, looks good to the 1.3 that we had last year. So. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And sometimes more, it's just that's what they estimate us on. So hopefully by the end of the year, it's a better year than they thought as well.
Is there any, I mean, given that it's our money invested, do we have any sort of even proportional say in terms or any part of that conversation of how it's invested?
No, it's kind of, this is where they put the money. There was a few years ago, it was a good year where they weren't anticipating a lot, but they were able to, it was As you said, CDs, things are timed. You have to keep the money in there a certain length of time. So there was a period where, was it 3 years ago, I think, they were able to get out of where they were and put them in somewhere else that got a lot more money. So again, we don't really have a say. They do with it what they can with everybody else's money as well. So we are getting some benefit of volume as opposed to just the reserves that we have, that 1.5 or whatever it is, that has to always be available to pull from if we needed to as well, which in the city, if we go over budget and need to use that money, we have it available to use. It's not like we have to worry about closing out some account to get to that money as well.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? I just think, Lima, that there should be some type of way that we have some type of input on how that money is invested. I don't know if it's a board or how it's approached, but there should be some type of input if we're depending on those returns.
I think I would be interested just to know, it seems to me like this is, well established, whether it's just Santa Monica policy or state policy, this isn't just somebody sitting in an office, I would presume, that's decided to do it this way. But it would be interesting, if possible, in the future for staff to bring us more information, just so we can better understand why it's invested the way it is.
Sure, and I'm curious myself, so.
I would imagine it could be because we're a fee-based arm of the city government, that even though we're completely independent and don't rely on taxpayer dollars for anything, we are inextricably intertwined with the city in some other functions. So we are, even though we're independent, we're technically still under that seal. Not under government but I bet you our fee base lies within the jurisdiction of the city itself as a charter entity. So I bet there's something.
That's very true. And when I say I'm curious and of course would bring information back, I'm curious about what the city, what their policies are about how they invest it, and I can get that information. But we are, of course, inextricably intertwined. It's in our charter amendment that we are part of the city, and we're part of that family.
I just kind of, lean back into Anastasia, Commissioner Foster's, my apologies, comments about getting a higher yield for our investments. It is perplexing. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay. If no one else has any other sure.
Yeah, not in that topic, but just on this topic of the proposed budget. Thank you for putting together I asked very last minute, and the staff put together sort of just a rundown of the last 5 years, the 5 last fiscal years, of taking a look at what the budgeted deficit or surplus was versus the actual deficit or surplus. This was something that came up last year that I asked the staff to take a closer look to see if there was any tightening they could do to balance the budget, the projected budget, or the proposed budget. And they did that, and as I mentioned on the last agenda item, the actuals have come in even better than proposed. I'm actually looking at a surplus now. So even though there's a projected deficit in this 24-25 budget, I don't have concerns about it because one, it's very small compared to the reserves, but also I'm confident that these numbers could look a lot better as the fiscal year plays out. And taking a look at the past 5 years that I mentioned, this data here, basically in 4 of those 5 years, the actuals came in better than what was budgeted. And in the 1 year that it didn't, it was just a smaller surplus than what was projected. So this relatively small, approximately $77,000 projected deficit, I'm confident that will look better at the end of the fiscal year, and even if it doesn't, we have sufficient reserves to cover that. So this looks good to me, and thank you for the presentation.
Of course, thank you.
I want to say thank you to Commissioner Gonska for requesting that. It makes it very clear. It clears it up and makes it very easy to read and decipher the information. Moving forward to our next administrative items, item 12D. What? I'm sorry?
Just, there's a, in your note, there should be another chair, chair statement. If we're done with 12C, then you should read that. That's okay.
So staff, please place a public hearing item on the June 13th agenda so that the board may consider adopting the 24-25 proposed operating budget. And so on item, now we're moving forward to item 12D. My apologies.
No problem. Okay, 12D. So that's what we're on, right? Yep, thank you. As mentioned in my earlier comments, Commissioner Gwynn resigned his position on the board. Vacancy must now be declared, and under the rent control law, the board should make an appointment at its next meeting. At the conclusion of the discussion of this item, the chair will declare a vacancy. As part of its discussion, however, the board should advise staff of any changes it wishes to see to the proposed application that was included in the board's packet. Staff will make such changes if requested, then place an announcement of the opening in the Santa Monica Daily Press and on the Rent Control Board's website. Applications will be accepted at the Rent Control Board office until noon on Wednesday, June 5th, which will allow staff to include all the completed applications with the board's packet on Thursday, June 6th. That's 1 week prior to the June 13th meeting, at which time the board will be able to hear directly from any applicants who choose to participate. After consideration, the board will make an appointment at the June 13th meeting. We're available for any questions.
Thank you. So I hereby declare a vacancy on our board. Please.
Does anybody have any?
I just had a question.
I'm sorry, my apologies. Go ahead, Commissioner Ivanov.
So I don't know if this is nitpicking, but so if we're declaring the vacancy today, correct? The 30 days that we need to make the appointment runs from today.
Well, you want to take this one?
Yeah. Yes, so we're aware that the regulations or the charter say 30 days. As a practical matter, we have to actually make the appointment at a meeting. And so we're allowing for a little extra beyond, just out of necessity.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't violating our own regulations by doing that.
Yeah.
But, okay.
That's okay.
Commissioner Gonska.
Would this be the time to discuss any changes to the application? Okay, so I was just curious, and please flag if I'm missing it somewhere, but I would be interested in adding, whether it's a question or just adding to one of the 4 existing questions, to ask applicants how long they intend to stay on the board, what their sort of long-term goal is for their participation on the board. We've had, just looking at Commissioner Gwynn's tenure, it was an appointment that happened between an election, and he resigned before even the next election. So I think it's within the interest of the board to have somebody who obviously there are unforeseen circumstances that could come up, but at least at the time of the application, to see what people's intentions are.
Do you want them to give a figure, or do you want to just ask if they're going to run for the seat in November?
Yeah, I mean, that's of what's most interest to me, is if they have an intention to run for a full term.
Okay.
So when you get appointed, just as a point of information, when you get appointed, there is also a timeline there. So if you get appointed, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, is it less than 1 year to the next election or within 2 years? It does not count as a term, first of all, and you must run to retain at the next available general election. even if that seat wouldn't normally be up until like the next. So yeah, so we could ask, do you intend to seek election to retain your seat from this appointment?
Right.
Would be a perfectly legitimate, in my opinion, I agree, a legitimate question to ask.
Great.
We can add that.
Could you do that again? No, put on your request to speak, because I didn't see it. Okay. Oh, okay. Did you have any other comments?
No.
Okay. Commissioner Foster, did you have any? Okay. So, we declare the position open, and there's a vacancy, and please will accept applications from interested individuals and place an appointment on the June 13th agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So moving on to board discussion items 14A. So this discussion item is about implicit bias training. And just in the spirit of our staff being trained on implicit bias, that we should lead from the top down. And as they are having to do this, I think that it would be the best practices for us as an elected body to also partake of that implicit bias training as well. So I'd like Commissioner Foster.
Thank you. Yeah, when I saw your item up here on the agenda, I couldn't agree more. And as a matter of fact, I had to go back and staff helped me look. 13 months ago, when I was chair and you were vice chair, there was an annual report given about this time last year and by Rose Patel. And there was a lot of emphasis placed upon a section where we looked at language barriers, access. We looked at a heat map of the city and GIS data to help us figure out where people were or were not taking advantage of our services in the spirit of furthering our goals of diversity, equity, inclusion of the services we give to this city and to the tenants and community members and landlords of this city. And at the conclusion of that section, I asked staff specifically who had been given this wonderful training on implicit bias that they were having, that they were commenting was so wonderful. And she said that the city of Santa Monica had provided it to all staff members of the entire city. Then I asked, well, gosh darn it, why weren't we asked? And I did point out 13 months ago that we were not included, nor were board and commissions appointees, nor was the city council included. So it was kind of funny. It was extended to all staff members, but it was not extended to us. And at that time, I did request that it be made available to us. And I think just time flew, and it didn't come back to us as an item. But yeah, I couldn't agree more, and it was requested once upon a time.
Well, welcome to Groundhog Day. So, Commissioner Ivanov.
So to that point, are we looking at using the same person that the city is using? Or are we looking at retaining a private professional on our own, like for a weekend, in which case, that's going to be another budgetary item, or what's the model that we're looking at here?
So, I will also include our executive director in this conversation as well. But it's...
We could look at the different options and come back with an item. Whenever we're procuring professional assistance, there's a procedure for doing that. And in terms of the budget, I don't think it's going to have that much of an impact, or we can craft it so that it's not going to impact what we've proposed. But we'd have to come back with an item. We will this time, and we'll, if that's the consensus of the board, we'll do that and make sure that we have either retained someone for you to consider and approve or have options.
Great.
Commissioner Foster.
Commissioner Gonskow's ahead.
Oh, I'm
of me.
sorry, Ms. Gonska. I'm sorry. My apologies. It just popped up on here. It's just.
Yeah, it's on. I just wanted to express my support as well. Thank you to the chair for bringing this to as an agenda item today, and I hopefully in short time we'll get options from staff and be able to schedule something. Thank you.
Commissioner Foster.
In the spirit of cost savings, maybe we could invite the city council and board and commission members, and thereby the city, to also share in the expense of a session, because I know from speaking to our staff that they had 2 4-hour sessions. It wasn't a whole weekend, but it was 2 4-hour sessions in total. That was what that service provider offered, but there might be other options.
So, in full transparency, I was looking at gun consulting services that offers diversity training, implicit bias training, what that firm has to offer. So if everybody would like to take a look at that, we can run it by staff and see what their thoughts are.
Yeah, we'll look at that firm too.
I want to really thank my fellow commissioners for agreeing to the implicit bias training. And I just want to thank my fellow commissioner, Anastasia Foster, in her show of leadership and her encouragement during my term here. Thank you. There is something that I want to do as far as our adjournment. And I'm really disappointed that Alvin is not here to adjourn as far as Asian Pacific Islander Month for the month of May. Unfortunately, he's taken ill and he is missed. But Mahogany, you have done a great job. Thank you. I want to thank Lima and Dan and our staff and those that are in the gallery this evening. Thank you for coming. And I also wanted to, I have an announcement to make. Not that I'm resigning. I just want to announce that I am going to throw my hat in the ring for city council. And I just want to thank Anastasia for her encouragement. Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you.